And let's begin reading. Again and again, Americans turn to the Civil War. Hundreds of new books are sold each year, refighting the battles, reevaluating the generals, the campaigns, the armies, the experiences of the common soldier and their families, the decisions made by presidents and congresses. Some scorns of professional journals dig deeper into the past and its records, while amateurs search for ancestors who fought for blue or the gray and Civil War roundtables, and Lincoln associations meet monthly to discuss what they and others have found. One is almost tempted to agree with Mark Twain when he said, "The work of many scholars has already thrown much darkness on the subject, and it is likely, if they keep working, we should know nothing at all." But the war is too important and too complicated to stop seeking answers. Our fascination arises from the fact that the conflict confirmed the nation with the most important issues. What is the nature of this nation? Should state or national power be used to solve our problems? What is the proper balance between liberty and security in times of war? Welcome Andy 5DF, I'm glad you could join us tonight. Or as Lincoln put it, justifying military law in civilian areas. Must a government of necessity be too strong for liberties of its own people, or too weak to maintain its own existence? How do we resolve the inevitable? Welcome Chris F, I'm glad you could join us to the live stream. Conflicts between slavery and freedom, race and liberty, and opportunity. As we confront these questions, we have to define. Welcome Ace QSH, I'm glad you could join us tonight for the live stream. What we are as one nation. The Civil War is our war, just as we are its offspring. Study of the conflict provides a laboratory for understanding the meaning of that fact. And this book provides a wonderfully useful collection of photographs, illustrations, texts, facts, descriptions, and definitions to assist our inquiries. One way to understand the war is by pointing to some of its significant numbers. A country of more than 30 people, some maybe prefer two countries, one with 11 million and the other with 20, engaged in a 4-year civil war in which almost 3 million. Thank you for the donation. I'm glad you enjoy it. Welcome DDD77. Welcome Eon Shane, and welcome everyone else for joining the live stream. This is the Civil War live stream. We're going to be doing this in between with another book. So, 3 million soldiers and sailors. An estimate 200 of them women distinguished as men fought. Among these young people, 620,000 died in the conflict, which involved 10,000 battles. Almost 200,000 of these soldiers and sailors were black men, most of them former slaves. As a result of this war, 4 million men, women, and children, all slaves. Welcome Cameron Liu and welcome Jack evening. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Were slaves no more? They were freed from a system whose greatest evil, in their eyes, of the slaves was that it treated them as property that could not be bought and sold. Between 1820 and 1860, 2 million slaves were sold. That means that a slave was sold every 3.6 minutes of the workday during those 4 decades. Approximately 260,000 of those slaves were married men and women. Approximately 186,000 were children under age 13. At great cost in lives, the war ended slavery. Loss of life was the ever-present factor in the conflict. Thank you for the donation, DDDD77. Most Americans died in the Civil War than died in the total of all American wars from the colonial wars until today. In Antietam, the bloodiest battle of the war, more Americans died than in the Revolutionary War, and a 3-day slaughter at Gettysburg surpassed even Antietam in its gore. And when the soldiers died, they were shuddering impacts in the homes they had left behind. Mothers and fathers lost their sons, wives lost their husbands, and children lost their fathers. And while the soldiers were away at war, many families, almost half the households in the nation, were absent a mature male. Still, there were enough men left between in both sections to foster anti-war movements. New gender roles were born. Women had to take on new tasks while they continued old ones running farms and shops. They were welcomed into a previously male-dominated nursing profession. They expanded their role as teachers. Many worked for an expanding national government, especially in the Treasury Department. There was more work for women and children to do in the bulging textile factories of the North. So, we're reading the introduction of a book on the Civil War called The Civil War, the definition reference including a chronology of events, an encyclopedia, and the memoirs of Grant and Lee by Phil Shaw Pauldan, John S. Bowman, and so let's continue. In their leisure time, populations sing songs that their respective crusades and their longing for peace call forth. The Civil War inspired many songs, including Just Before the Battle Mother. There were many songs about mothers. Tenting Tonight on the Old Campground, The Bonnie Blue Flag, Honest Pat Murphy of the Irish Republic, The Battle Hymn of the Republic, and We Are Coming from the Cotton Fields. Southern women and children faced the most difficult times. Sherman's and Sheridan's armies destroyed crops and homes and forced them to seek another place to live and make new lives in much more difficult circumstances. While slave owners had welcome Assassin EA. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Interesting username. Welcome DDDD77 back. Had to fear what the slavers would do when so many masters went to war. In fact, slaves attacked their masters directly. They rushed to the protection of Union armies, slowed down their work, left old farms and plantations to set up new ones where the North had conquered Southern territory and placed like Port Royal, South Carolina, and Davis Bend, Mississippi, Jefferson Davis's old plantation. Welcome, Jane, to this live stream. We're going to be taking a break from the 70 Wonders of China tonight and do a book on the Civil War, and we'll be alternating days between the two until 70 Wonders is done, and then we'll alternate with another book from there. All these changes were dependent upon the actions on the battlefields, and here generals and their soldiers wrote in blood and courage and cowardice and genius and determination most of what the public remembers about the war. Images and slogans from the conflict. There were two green armies rushing toward each other, and from at first a Union victory, but then Jackson's men stood like a stone wall. Welcome to the live stream. Glad you could join us tonight, 2017 in Anna. I hope you enjoy this book on the Civil War. And the title of the battle turned. A frightened Union army rushed back to the Pickeards, and reporters to the safety of Washington, D.C. Many began to doubt that this would be a short war. Then there is the image of the young Napoleon McClellan boasting, "I can do it all," training and training and training the army until Lincoln finally orders him to march to the peninsula, where he discovers that he cannot do it. All at his president's orders him to retreat. Meanwhile, in the West, a pre-war failure becomes a general who understands the need to fight relentlessly, as he observes a battlefield so sown with bodies that you could walk across it on the dead men. And then there is Antietam, with its landscape of blood that allows Lincoln to emancipate the slaves. But then there is the slaughter at Fredericksburg. Welcome to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Followed by Lee's genius maneuvering at Charlottesville. Omnisciently, the Gray Army moves north towards Gettysburg, where the tide of war turns, where Vicksburg also fails, and the Father of Waters goes unvexed to the sea. Cucamonga raises rebel hopes, but Chattooga darkens them. Grant, who goes east. Sherman commands the west. The unrelenting bloodbath in the wilderness and beyond ends at Appomattox, even while Sherman, once slowed before Atlanta, rushes out toward the Savannah and turns north. Welcome, Aya Kong, to the live stream. Glad you could join us tonight. We are on the introduction of the Civil War book. And, let's see. Oops. Let me just go to the next section here. Nope, that's not it. And all while a more modern war emerges as the first ironclad ships clash. Soldiers use rifles that kill a quarter mile, and rifles that load and fire more quickly, so that more men can be killed faster. Standing as a symbol of it, its railroad, which carried arms and ammunition and supplies to armies of tens of thousands. Then hundreds of men, Congresses in both sections passed laws that shape the post-war world: greenback money, banking laws, bond sales, and railroad construction. The North greases the slide into a new day, with the homestead laws, charters for Western railroads, and higher tariffs. The fires of war shaped a new America, This fine volume provides details to enlarge our picture of these images of war. And by providing the views of both Grant and Lee, it allows us valuable perspectives on this complex and ever-compelling event, our Civil War. Welcome now B52, and welcome Woodrow to the live stream. Glad you could join us tonight. We are going to alternate books between the Civil War book and the 70 Wonders of China until we get through the 70 Wonders of China, in which we will find a different book to replace that. So, let me just go get our pictures. Let's look at this picture. We're going to start with so on the on this page right here, on the very front of the page is actually a short drawing of one of the battles of the Civil War. I forget myself which one it was, but you can see in the background that there are railroad tracks next to the river, the dead cavalry line nearby. The Confederates in the gray are trying to charge the Union's cannon in bronze that you see predominantly in the picture, while in the foreground to the right is an infantry brigade getting ready to outflank the Confederate charging line. To its rear, you see Ulysses S. Grant on his horse commanding the battlefield from a predominant position, with one of his side generals taking orders and repeating them. In the far background, close to the railroad tracks, there is the guns firing the infantry, and on the other side of the river is a grand cavalry charge at another set of cannons. Alright. Welcome to the live stream test. I'm glad you could join us tonight for the Civil War. Welcome, You Are Blamed. This is our Civil War reading, and I hope you enjoy. The picture that we have here is an all-African unit that was one of many that were eventually formed in the North to participate in the fighting. Now, the book doesn't state which unit it is, but there were a couple units that were formed during the Civil War, both by the North and the South, to basically battle out the other sides. The South had a conscript act in the late war, toward the in the very last year. The South enlisted a act to conscript African Americans, and the North had been doing it for a while. Welcome back, Tess. So, thank you for the donation. I will improve on the writing in a future live stream, but I experimented a little bit by having it better prepared. Anyway, so we'll go to the... I'm not looking at the text, I'm looking at the pictures anyway. Our next photo right here, this is the Harpers Weekly illustration of 1860, showing slaves arriving at Key West, Florida, an actual slave ship called the Wildfire. Now, while the African trade slave, and thusly the triangular trade that went from Africa to the United States to Europe and back, was pretty much finished. Welcome to the live stream, Guru. I'm glad you could join us tonight. While the triangular trade by the Civil War was pretty much ended, at least in North America, there were still the occasional slave ships that went to the Americas, and this is one slave ship that landed in Key West in 1860. So, move to the next picture. So, this picture right here shows civilians that are forced to flee the sites before the combat, as much of the Civil War pretty much destroyed their homes and liveliness. In fact, actually, Gone with the Wind is partially based on the Civil War itself, specifically the near end of the Civil War and a little bit into Reconstruction. Reconstruction is a period after the Civil War in which the South was under military occupation until 1879. And that's welcome, Alyssa, to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. And the Civil War, the Civil War is considered in America history the first total war, at least fought on our soil. The first named total war. Of course, there was always slash and burn tactics. Yeah, Gone with the Wind is a good movie. Long movie, but good movie. And the Gone with the Wind tries to depict this time period toward the end of the Civil War into Reconstruction. Now, and actually Gone with the Wind, the title is basically, the title itself is a pun on the Civil War itself, Gone with the Wind. Welcome, Henry Cameron. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Gone with the Wind basically references that the Southern economy, the Old South, was damaged permanently by the Civil War. And Gone with the Wind is basically a pun on that, which is why the movie is named Gone with the Wind. All the same, you could also say Gone with the Wind is a reference to the love circle between the main two characters, but that's a different story. Welcome, 818. I'm glad you could join us for tonight's live stream. Feel free to comment below. This is the American Civil War we're doing. We'll be back to the 70 Wonders of China tomorrow and just be alternating between that and this book until we're done with the 70 Wonders of China. But I thought I would take a little break and do this book. Welcome back, Assassin EA. It's a pretty good game. So we'll go on to the next picture, So this picture right here are dead Confederates that were lined up after the battle at Antietam in preparation for their burial. The Civil War, out of any war in United States history, is one where the casualties were their highest for American citizens because it was a war. It's a civil war that was fought between America itself, brother v. brother, sister v. brother, father versus son, and so forth. Welcome, partner. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Love the muscles. So, battles like Antietam had high casualties. And many of these high casualty battles lasted a number of days. And the other thing that made the Civil War actually first for the Civil War is the fact that the Civil War is a war in which people actually took pictures of the battlefield. Before the Civil War, the camera was not invented, so you cannot see pictures of the battlefield and the aftermath of war. So a lot of writings about war in books prior to the Civil War were based upon the glory of war and the glory that you would get after a battle, but of course did not necessarily depict the common soldier's casualty rate. Thank you, Tess, and welcome Sandra Shang to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight for the Civil War book. We'll be alternating between this and the 70 Wonders of China. And I believe we can go to the next picture, which is right here. The depiction says on the side, illustration depicts the Army of the Potomac passing and reviewing stand during the Grand Parade in Washington, D.C. on May 23rd, 1865. Thank you. Thank you for the applause. Welcome, Canvid, to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. So, 1865, May 23rd, is right after the Civil War, and it was one of the bloodiest affairs that occurred. It is the bloodiest war in U.S. history because it was fought against Americans, for Americans on American soil. And one of the reactions of General Grant after the Civil War at the peace signing was of reverence for his fellow comrades from the Confederates. Because while the other soldiers initially cheered after the signing of after the signatures of surrender were signed, Grant silenced his soldiers and said that it was time for reverence. They are basically our brothers. Welcome QDWD777 to the live stream. Glad you could join us tonight. And this pass and review is basically is kind of like a victory march, as a victory for the end of the war, very similar to that of a Roman emperor passing and reviewing in the city of Rome after a successful conquest. Of course, as I said earlier, the Civil War is the first war in which the camera was used to take pictures of the battlefield in American history. So you see all the gruesome effects of the Civil War depicted, more so than you would have in the Revolutionary War or the War of 1812, or even randomly the campaign in Algeria for the First Barbary Coast War. Now, there's actually a lot of wars that U.S. history does not teach its students in terms of existing, such as the First Barbary Pirate War. But anyway, we'll move on to the next picture. Oh, so actually it looks like I took a picture. This one's out of order, but the depiction says, although sentimental, this print depicts a sense that was repeated countless times in both North and South as men left their families behind to fight the war. Welcome, Young G. I'm glad you could join us tonight for the live stream on the Civil War. We just read through the intro. We're just going through a couple pictures, and so, as I said earlier, the Civil War was a war between Americans, and many families were divided because of the Civil War. Welcome, Flee Yang, to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. In states like Ohio, there were a lot of settlers who came from Virginia initially, while there were also a lot of there were also a lot of people that also came from states in the Northeast. Yes, this is a history of the Civil War. We'll be reading together bits of the book, and I will also go through the pictures on the side. Welcome back, Jan, to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight, or rejoin us tonight. Alright. So we'll move on to the next little section. Alright, there it is. So this is the Emancipation Proclamation. It's toward the beginning of the book, and it basically... One second. Alright, so the Emancipation Proclamation was made after the Battle of Gettysburg, a month or so after the Battle of Gettysburg, in which was a major turning point for the Civil War, and this proclamation was the first proclamation that freed the slaves in cities in the northern states, the Union, but did not free slaves in slave states in the South or on the border states. Welcome, Sharon ZSY. I'm glad you could join us tonight. This is a book on the Civil War, and we're going through the pictures in said book. Now, I am glad that everyone could come here tonight, and let's read together what the proclamation states. Whereas, on the 22nd day of September, welcome Damon Shing, in the year of the Lord, you're not going to be able to read it, so just listen along. 1862, a proclamation was issued by the President of the United States containing, among other things, the following. The wit within any state or designated part of a state, the people shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall then be thenceforth and forever free, and the executive government of the United States, including, welcome Kylan to the live stream, I'm glad you joined us tonight, and the executive government of the United States, including the military and the naval authorities thereof, will recognize and unionize the freedom of such persons, and will do the act or sorts to repress such persons or any of them in any effort that they may for the actual freedom. That the executive will, on the first day of January, as foresaid by proclamation, designate the state and the parts of the and parts of the states, if any, in which the people thereof respectively shall then be in rebellion against the United States, and the fact that any other state or the people thereof shall not be of this day in good faith represented in the Congress of the United States by members chosen thereto at elections wherein a majority of the qualified voters of each state shall be participated, shall in absence of strong conveying testimony be deemed conclusive evidence that such state and the people thereof are not then in rebellion against the United States. Welcome 606, welcome Amy XLN, and welcome Piper Lannister. Glad you could join us tonight. You're not going to be able to read the print on this. I'm barely able to read the print. It's actually really tiny print in the book, so just listen along. Now thereof, I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, by virtue of the power in me vested as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, in this time of actual armed rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, and as a fit and necessary war measure for supporting said rebellion, due in the first day of January of the year of our Lord 1863, and in association with my proposal as to do publicly proclaim for the full period as 100 days from the day of the first above mentioned order. Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, except for the parishes of St. Bernard, Clackamas, Jefferson, St. John's, St. Charles, St. James, Avison, Assumption, Dearborn, La Force, 48 counties designated as West Virginia, and also the counties of Berkeley, Accommon, Nakatomi, Elizabeth City, York, Princess Anne, and Norfolk, including the cities of Norfolk and Portsmouth. Welcome Eldos and everyone else to the live stream. Listen along on this one. I can barely read it myself, and I bet you can't either. And which exceptional parts are for the present left precisely as if the proclamation were not issued. And by the virtue and power, for the purpose as foresaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves, with said designated states and parts of states, are and henceforth shall be free. I said that executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons. And I hereby enjoy upon the people so declared to be free and to abstain from all violence, useless in necessary self-defense, and I recommend to them that in all cases will allowed they labor faithfully for the variable wages. Welcome, Carlson. Yeah, no, Rita, you're gonna have to listen to this one. I couldn't get a good picture, and the script is like a size 8 font on it. Welcome back, 606. And I further declare to make known that any persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice warranted by the Constitution upon military necessity, I invoke the considerable judgment of mankind and the gracious faith of Almighty God. Welcome, GYN, finishing up the Emancipation Proclamation. I have hereto set my name and vessel in the seal of the United States is affirmed. Done at the city of Washington, the 1st day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1863, and in the independence of the United States, the 87th. By the President, Secretary of State. I definitely cannot translate this document into Chinese. So, if I were to, I would definitely flunk on translating this document to Chinese. So, let me just see what we have next. So, we have 17 minutes left. The next section of our book is an illustrated chronology of the Civil War that starts in 1619. But this is basically pre-war. This is basically pre-war statements and events that occurred. Welcome, Matthew Wong, to the live stream. Glad you could join us tonight. Let's see. So, I do need to take a better picture of that in the future. So, let's start with let's start at the top left. Part of the text is cut out, so I'm going to set the camera on said section. August 1619. English settlers in Jamestown, Virginia, purchased 20 black Africans from a Dutch frigate. Although these particular Africans are treated as indentured servants, it is not long before European colonists in North America are treating black Africans as slaves. They are imported, bought, and sold, as though material property. Welcome, Sunny J, and welcome, Suyon. Live stream, I'm glad you could join us tonight. And their children are condemned to a life of slavery. Most of these black Africans are held in the southern colonies, but thousands are also held by northerners. And many northerners profit directly and indirectly from the slave trade. in the ensuing decades as the number of slaves increases to hundreds of thousands. Slavery itself evolves into a legally sanctioned system. July 1776. The Declaration of Independence. With its resounding self-eviction, truth that all men are created equal, is adopted on 4 July. It is largely the work of Thomas Jefferson himself, a slave owner, and it will be signed by many men who are also slave owners. So an interesting fact about this document is the document was pretty much finished. Welcome, la la la. The Declaration of Independence was pretty much finished on July 2nd, and that's when it, which is an interesting fact because that's when it was ready to be sent out. Whereas July 4th is just the day that the Congress, with varying degree, signed the document. So we really celebrated in America not the Independence Day, but the day that the Declaration of Independence was signed itself. So our next section, 1780 to 1804. In the northern states, various laws are passed, the court decisions handed down that effectively abolish slavery. In the South, however, where slaves have become inextricably involved in the economy and a total way of life, it remains legally sanctioned and sustained. So, let's see. Slavery was, there were more slaves coming into America during that time frame, and just all throughout the early American life. But if you were to actually study history at this time, you would note that in American history, slaves were actually losing purpose in the South as time progressed, because the industry developed in the South was not based around the need for huge plantations. Right now I'm basically talking about the what I just read as a small factor. I'll get back to the next section in a minute. So, nice to meet you too, 606. May to September 1787. In Philadelphia, 55 delegates from the 12 states, Rhode Island refuses to participate, meet to draw up a federal constitution for a United States. The resultant document is, in many ways, a compromise among various conflicting views, sectional, economic, social, philosophical, and otherwise. One of the major splits is between southern and northern states over the issue of allowing slavery to continue, but several southern states refuse to join in any union if slavery is allowed. So despite the warning of a George Manson, delegate from Virginia, that slaves bring a judgment of heaven on a country, the Constitution includes 3 clauses that effectively sanction the continuation of slavery. 1. Fugitive slaves are to be returned to their owners. 2. Slave trade is to be permitted until 1808. And 3. For the purpose of appointing congressional representatives on the basis of population, a slave is to be counted as 3/5 of a white person. In debate that ensues in states, most Northerners as well as Southerners who are opposed to ratifying the Constitution are simply against placing so much power in national government and denying powers to the states. Welcome Lena and welcome Albaba to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight, and give me 1 second. So, now move forward to our next section, July 1787. Meeting in New York City, as fading government under the Articles of Confederation, the Congress passes the last major act on territorial or Northwest Ordinance. One of its clauses states, "There shall neither be slavery nor involuntary servitude in said territory," although immediate application only to the territory that will eventually be subdivided into the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The ordinance suggests a national policy of designated all new territories of the states as free soil, that is, as off to limits to slavery. Welcome to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. I'm reading the next section here. December 1791. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights, are put into effect. They are guaranteed many individual rights, but say nothing about slavery or the rights of black Africans. October 1793. Ellie Whitney applies for a patent on a cotton gin, a device that greatly increases the speed and ease of which cotton fibers are separated from the seeds. This machine will soon increase the need for labor to produce more cotton, and since most of the cotton is grown in southern states, this will lead for a need to more slaves. November to December 1798. The legislators of Kentucky and Virginia adopt resolutions contending that the Alien and Sedition Acts are unconstitutional and that individual states retain the right to determine this. These acts are passed in June and July by Congress controlled by the Federalist Party, desirous of restricting the growth and freedoms of the Jeffersonian Republicans. What is particularly significant is that these resolutions, defiant expressions of state rights, were written by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, both of whom would become President of the United States. So, actually, an interesting fact about the Alien and Sedition Acts of this time, where the Alien and Sedition Acts were the first law debating on how the United States should accept immigrants into the United States. It basically affects immigrants mostly. And if you were to read said law, the Alien and Sedition Acts are basically suggesting to put an end to immigration in the United States from outside countries as early as the 1790s. While this was pretty much overturned with a change of political parties in the United States from the Federalists to the Democrat Republicans, it actually is the first true immigration policy put out by the United States, specifically stating our policy on immigration, something that didn't exist prior. Welcome to the live stream, everybody. I'm glad you could all join us tonight. We are in the last 6 minutes of the live stream. We can finish up this page. So, November 1799. The Kentucky legislature passes another resolution reaffirming that of the 1798, but adding that the remedy for what states consider infractions of the Constitution is nullification. I don't understand what you mean by invisibility, S. Could you elaborate further? recitation. So I can't translate the article here, but I can read it again. The Kentucky legislature passes another resolution reaffirming that the 1798, but adding that the remedy for what states consider infractions of the Constitution is nullification. I actually do welcome Sweet Momsy. I'm glad you could join us to the live stream tonight. Give me 1 second, and I actually might be able to get a Google Translate from Google Pictures. I'm going to see how this works. I just got it earlier today. English to... Let me just get a picture here. And... snap. Alright, give me 1 second. No. Alright. I'm trying to put together a translation real quick with this, and it's not working too well. This is my first time using Google Translate in this fashion. So, wait, there we are. So, alright, 1 second, guys. I'm going to put down some pictures while we still have a little bit of time. Oh, shit. Alright, so I'm back. I have the pictures of the document below. I'm about to put them on the camera roll so that you guys can basically read it. I took a couple pictures. Let me see if I can get them up. So, can you guys read those? Let me, these are Google translations of these are Google translations. So right here, party restricting growth and freedoms of the Republicans. Let's see. Welcome, France Sougel. I'm glad you could join us tonight. That's not what I wanted. Alright, I just lost it. So, short story. To make the story short, I'm basically going to say that we're going to do another live stream in 24 hours at the same time, 11 a.m. And said short story is going to... welcome Linda to the live stream. Said short story is basically going to be our... Alright, so can you guys read that? This is my first time using Google Translate, the picture section. So, I'll be using Google Translate in the future for translations of the text in this book. You guys can read the English in this book. If you want copies of this sections in this book in Chinese... Oh! The name of this book is right here. The book is called The Civil War. The definition reference including a chronology of events, an encyclopedia, and the memoirs of Grant and Lee. I will see you all tomorrow. Have a good night. And to YouTube, I will see you all